Hey guys, it's Randy with Lowbuck LS here again, and in this episode I'm going to show you guys how you can monitor fuel pressure. I'm actually going to show you two ways you can monitor fuel pressure on the old Gen 3 LS based engines. That's one of the downfalls of the old Gen 3 LS's is there's no built-in fuel pressure sensor that you can log in HP tuners like there is on the newer I think it's Gen 4 or mid-Gen 4 and newer. They've got like a fuel pressure control module that there's a parameter you can log in HP tuners if you want to monitor your fuel pressure. But the old Gen 3s, like my truck here, don't have that feature. So first thing we're going to do, the simple and easy way of checking your fuel pressure is we're going to put in a fuel pressure gauge, and that'll be good for just a quick visual indication of our fuel pressure. But I really want something that I can log in HP tuners, so we're going to figure out how to wire in this. It's basically a pressure sensor that I got off Amazon. I think I got it a year or so ago when I first started the channel, and I was messing around with Arduino boost controller, and I actually was using this as a boost pressure sensor, but I think we can make it work as a fuel pressure sensor input to the ECM as well. But because I've already used my EGR wire to wire in the 0 to 5 volt from my wideband, this sends out a 0 to 5 volt signal as well. So we're going to have to find a different spot to wire that into. So I'm thinking it'll either be the fuel pressure sensor, or I've heard of guys using the AC pressure sensor, but I don't think my truck actually has that. So we're going to figure that out as we go, and hopefully we can make it work and be able to log our fuel pressure in HP tuners the way the Gen 4 and Gen 5 guys do. So we will flip the camera around and get started here. Okay, so what we're going to use to plumb this, first we'll hook up the gauge, and then I'm not sure if we'll have both the gauge and the sensor hooked up at the same time. I guess it'd be nice to do it that way I can verify that my sensor reads the same as what the gauge does. But basically I got this Autometer braided hose, part numbers 3227, and that is going to thread onto, there's a little Schrader valve inside this cap on the fuel rail here, so we'll thread that Schrader valve out of there and thread this hose onto there, and then there's some adapters and stuff here. And the gauge I just got it at Princess Auto. I think it's actually meant for some kind of hydraulics or something, because it's got this red and green indication on here, but it's 0 to 100 psi anyways, which will be about the range we want, since it should operate at about 58 psi under normal conditions. And I think this is actually a boost referenced. Like if you look at the fuel regulator, there's this hose that goes up to the intake manifold. So I think how this works is, as for every pound of boost pressure, I should have one more pound of fuel pressure. So we'll see if that's actually how that works. But first thing we're going to do though is, because there should be 58 pounds of pressure in that fuel rail, to relieve that pressure, we'll open the fuse box under the hood here, and you can see, if I get the lighting right, I've marked one of these relays with an F, and that is the relay we got to pull to disable the fuel pump. And actually, if you look at the chart here, it says that relay is F pump, but since I work on my fuel system quite a bit, I just put a big F on that relay there. So I will open up the garage door so we don't get gassed out here, and then we'll fire up the truck, and I'll pull that relay out. I'll just make sure it's kind of loose here. It sometimes takes a bit to get it out. I'll just put it in lightly there, and then we'll open the door, fire up the truck, and pull that relay, and that'll shut off the fuel pump, and it'll basically use up most of the pressure that's in the fuel rail system there, and won't spray as much gas all over when we pull that little Schrader valve out. So we'll do that now. Okay, so I'm going to start up the truck like I said. And then we'll go pull the relay. Okay, so I got this Vortec cover loose here so we can access this port on the fuel rail. So I'm going to pull this little cap off, and then you should be able to see there's like a bicycle Schrader valve in there. So I'm going to take a little screwdriver and just relieve any pressure that oh yeah, there's still a bunch in there. I thought running that fuel pump would relieve a bunch of that, so I'll just give her a couple more shots here. Probably should have used some kind of bucket or container or something, but anyways, now I know that the fuel pressure is relieved and down to 0 there. I'm going to grab just a regular tire valve tool, and I think we should be able to thread that Schrader valve out of that port in the fuel rail there, so we'll do that. Okay, so I got just a regular tire Schrader valve tool. That's the package it came in, 4-way tire valve tool. So now I'm gonna reach in there, and now that we've relieved the pressure, we shouldn't get a big blast of fuel coming out, I don't think. There's a bit dripping down there, but oh, I guess it takes a bit more threading. Just thread it in there pretty good, so I'll put that tool back on. Thread her out a few more turns yet. And now I've got, I don't know if you can see that there, it's just like a regular tire valve like you'd use to put air in your tire. So now that we've got that off of there, I'll open up this package here, and then I think this hose end here will thread directly onto that fitting on my fuel rail crossover pipe there. So okay, so we got that hose out of the package, so we're just gonna thread it onto that fitting there, and it does thread on nicely, and it just takes a regular 9/16 wrench, and we'll tighten that up, but not go so tight that it strips. But seeing it is dealing with gasoline, and we're right above the hot exhaust manifold, and the turbo is right down here, we do want it good and tight. And now we'll dig out that adapter kit that came with the set, and we'll basically adapt it to this gauge, and then we can actually take it for a drive and monitor our pressure just with the fuel gauge. Okay, to install this gauge, I've got this adapter that came with the kit. I think this is like an AN4 is what that hose is, and then it's just got a female 1/8 NPT, which is the same as what this gauge is. So I'll thread that onto there, and it just tightens up again with a regular 9/16 wrench. And again, we'll go, don't want to strip the threads or anything, but we don't want it to be leaking gasoline anywhere. And then this other end of the hose will just thread on there like that, and we'll tighten that up. Now if we wanted to, because you're not supposed to mount a fuel gauge in the cab, so we could mount a little bracket or something so you can see it through the windshield or whatever, eh? I've seen that guys do that before, but I think for now I'll just set it up there somewhere where I can see it, and then we can take it for a drive and see what our fuel pressure is doing, and then we'll come back and work on getting this electronic sensor hooked up so we can log that in HP tuners. Actually, I think rather than actually just going for a drive, I'll just put this gauge where I can see it here, and if we plug our fuel relay back in, and if I go and turn the key on, we should see just under 60 pounds of pressure on that gauge, I think. So we'll turn the key on. Sorry, camera cut out on me for a second there, but yeah, that's weird. I thought that with the truck not running that I would even have my 58 pounds, but you can see I don't even have 10 pounds there, so maybe we'll try. I'll open up that garage door again and we'll actually fire up the truck and see what our fuel pressure does. And there you go. I figured out every time I start my truck, my phone connects to the Bluetooth in the stereo and stops the video that I'm recording. So, but you could see there when the truck was running that I had about, I think it was 55 pounds or so of fuel pressure. So the gauge is working. Now we'll look into getting that electronic pressure sensor working. Alright, so we got that pressure gauge working the way it should, and if we wanted just the pressure gauge we could mount that permanently, but like I said before, I kind of want something that I can log with HP tuners, so we're going to try and figure out how we can get this pressure sensor wired into the truck and be able to log it in HP tuners. So the problem I've got is I bought this like a year ago for a different project, and I'm not sure what the range of it is. I know it's 0 to 5 volts, so what we're going to do, I got going to do some testing on the bench. I've got a power supply here that I borrowed from the plant that I work at, and it is putting out 5.00 volts. So basically we got to connect power to this red and black wire on this sensor. So we'll put 5 volts to that, and then this yellow wire is the output of the sensor. So basically the voltage coming out on this yellow wire will be proportional to the pressure that is on this. So basically what I'm going to do to test this, I've got a little fitting rigged up tied into my air compressor down here. So first of all, I'm going to hook it up with no pressure on it and see what we read for a voltage out on this yellow wire. And then, because we shouldn't have to go any higher than like 80 pounds, I'll put like 20 pounds on it and measure what we got for voltage, and then do 40 and 60 and 80, and then kind of make a chart of what my voltage is at each one of those pressures. And then we'll have to do a bit of math and figure out a formula to enter. We'll have to do a custom, like a user defined math formula in HP tuners. So but what we'll do right now is get this hooked up with the red and black to our 5 volt power and get rigged up to measure. Basically we'll be measuring the voltage between this yellow wire and the black wire and kind of making a graph that will tell us the calibration, I guess, or the range of this pressure sensor. So we'll do that now. Okay, so like I said we were gonna do, I've got 5 volts hooked up to the red wire, black wire is going to the negative on my power supply. And then, oh, heater just kicked in. It's getting cold up here in Canada, and there's snow on the ground this morning. So, but anyways, we're measuring the output of this pressure sensor on the yellow wire, basically with reference to ground on the black wire. So you can see with no pressure on it, with it just sitting on the bench, we've got 0.491 volts. So I'm just making a chart here. So I wrote down at 0 psi, I've got 0.491 volts on it. So now we'll take it up to, actually we'll thread this sensor into this T-fitting here and crank up the regulator on the compressor until we've got 20 pounds of pressure on it, and record our voltage. And then we'll do it at 40 and 60 and 80 pounds as well. And we shouldn't need to go higher than that, because yeah, it should only be running at, well, maybe we'll do it at 100 as well, so just in case I'm running 40 pounds of boost at some point or something. But so yeah, we'll do 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100 psi. Okay, you can see we're at 20 pounds on the gauge there, and we're at 0.944 for volts at 20 pounds. So I'll write that down on my little sheet, and then we'll go up to 40 pounds. And now you can see we're at 40 pounds on the gauge, and we're at 1.412 volts on the voltmeter on the output on our yellow wire. So we'll record that and go up to 60 pounds. Alright, now we're at 60 pounds, and we're at 1.876 on the voltmeter. So we'll record that and go up to 80 pounds. Okay, we got her at 80 pounds on the gauge. We're at 2.355 on the voltmeter. So now we'll take her up to 100 pounds. Alright, now we're at 100 pounds, and we're at 2.8045. We'll call it 2.805. So we'll write that down on the list, and then we'll have to figure out what formula we're going to need to enter into HP tuners. Alright, so there's our, I don't know if you want to call it a calibration chart or range, but basically it's telling us what the voltage is for each pressure in 20 pound increments from 0 to 100. So now we've got to figure out a formula, and I shouldn't have dropped out of high school because I remember something like a Y equals mx plus b or some deal. But basically we got to figure out a formula to multiply this number by some number, some constant, and add some number to it to get this number, and see if we can figure out one formula that will work for all of these numbers. So I'm going to shut off the camera for a minute and think about this, but I'm thinking the number we're going to have to add in the equation will be this 0.0491, because, or subtract, I don't know. Let me get my head wrapped around this, and once I've got it sorted out, I'll turn the camera back on. Alright, I think I got this figured out here. So I took this chart from the test we just did here, and I subtracted, we know the change in PSI is 100, so I had to figure out the change in voltage for that 100 PSI. So I subtracted this voltage at 100 PSI, the 2.805, and I subtracted this number, our voltage at 0, from it. So I got 2.805 minus 0.491, and that gives me a change in voltage. So the voltage changed 2.314 volts when the pressure changed 100 psi. So that helped me come up with this number. So I took the change in pressure, which is 100 psi, divided by the change in voltage, 2.314 volts, and so divided that 100 by 2.314 volts, and I came up with this factor of 43.215 psi per volt. So anytime the pressure changes 43 pounds, the voltage will change a volt. So I use that constant to come up with this formula here, which is what we'll end up entering into HP tuners. So basically you take the voltage that this sensor is putting out on the yellow wire, subtract 0.491 from it, and multiply it by this 43.215, and that will give you that the pressure is being logged by HP tuners. So I just went through and tested all of the voltages on this chart. So at 0 psi, obviously 0.491 minus 0.491 is 0, times 43 comes up with 0. This 0.944, subtract our 0.491, multiply by our 43.215, and we come up with 19.57. So the reason it's a little bit out is because this sensor isn't a linear, like it's not going to be dead on. But the main thing is, so I checked it at 40, we'll be logging 39.8, but the pressure we're actually running at, which will be 58, we're only 0.15 of a psi out at 60. So it's going to be pretty well, it's pretty well bang on. It's 0.2 psi out at 40, 0.15 psi out at 60. At 80 it's a little high, and at 100 it's bang on. But at the pressures we'll be operating at, it'll be pretty darn close. So that's the formula we're gonna end up entering into HP tuners. But first, I got to figure out how we're going to get this sensor wired into the truck. So I did a little bit of research, and I found out that these trucks, like I mentioned before, they don't have that AC pressure sensor. So I think I'm going to have to go with the fuel tank pressure sensor. So I think we're going to put the truck up on jack stands here and see if we can find that wiring for our fuel tank pressure sensor. Okay guys, so I got the truck up on jack stands here, and I actually hooked up my laptop and started up the scanner here, and I added a channel. I'll show you guys how to do that in a little bit here, but added a channel for fuel tank pressure, and right now it's reading 1.56 volts. So I'm going to crawl under the truck and disconnect the connector on top of the tank and make sure that drops to 0, and that will tell me that I'm dealing with the right wires that I want to wire up my Amazon sensor to there. So we'll crawl under the truck now and disconnect that sensor and make sure we got the right wires that we're working with there. And just before we go under the truck, I'm going to look at the wiring diagram here, and this is in a standard Haynes repair manual for this truck. And so it shows fuel tank pressure sensor. The colors we're looking for are black, dark green, and gray. And from what I've seen, like from wiring in the EGR sensor and stuff, the black and the gray are pretty standard colors. Like if you follow the gray, it goes over here and over here. And so the gray is your 5 volt power to the sensor, just like over here on the bench. We've got our 5 volts power. That's always on that red wire. So that's the wire we're going to connect the red wire of the sensor. We're going to connect to the gray wire in the wiring harness. And then the black is your negative, so that's going to be the same as the black of the negative on that sensor. And then the dark green is going to be our signal wire, which is going to connect to the yellow wire on the sensor. So we'll crawl under the truck now and try and find the connector for that sensor, and I'll unplug it, and then we'll verify on the scanner that our voltage has dropped to 0. So we'll see you underneath the truck. Okay, I'm underneath the truck. I'm looking at, this is the top of the fuel tank, that little hanger where your fuel pump and stuff connects to. So you can see the two wire bundles there. The one on the right, I believe, is the fuel pump, and the one on the left, that one right there, I believe, is the connector for that fuel pressure sensor. So I'm gonna have to turn the camera off here and reach up in there and unplug that connector, and then we'll get those wires out of there, and I'll verify that our pressure has, or our voltage has dropped to 0 on the scanner. So alright, so I got you can see that's the top of the gas tank there. I got this connector disconnected, and those are the wires that correspond with the colors in that wiring diagram I just showed you guys. We got a gray, a black, and a dark green. So those are the wires we need to connect our sensor to, but the problem is we got to get them up to the front of the truck, to the engine compartment. So I may try, you can see I've got them pulled out of the harness a little bit there. I'll try and pull them out a bit more, but I think we're gonna have to run some other wires to extend them back up to the front of the truck. Okay, and now that I've unplugged that connector, you can see our fuel tank pressure sensor voltage has dropped to 0.02. So that tells us we're dealing with the right wires. So now I got to figure out how to route them wires from back by the fuel tank to up here somewhere where I can connect to my fuel tank sensor. So we'll figure that out now. Okay, so that wiring harness for that fuel pressure sensor is too intertwined with the main harness. I can't get the wires up to the engine compartment there, so I'm just going to extend them. This is basically trailer wiring. It's four 14 gauge wires all bundled together, so I'm going to use that to extend that wiring up to the engine bay so I can connect this little fuel pressure sensor here. So we'll do that now. I'll get this wire ran from the fuel tank area up to, and I'll show you guys here. So I got that braided hose connected to the fuel rail right there, and I just kind of ran it down underneath the throttle body, and it's coming up, and I'll mount that fuel pressure sender probably to the firewall right around there, I think. So that's the area I want them wires to come up, so we'll do that now. And that's what that bundle of four 14 gauge wires looks like when it's off the roll. I just cut a chunk long enough to go from the fuel tank to the engine compartment, and then because I only need 3 wires, I think I'm going to peel that green wire off of there and just use the white, brown, and the yellow. So we'll get that wire ran now. Okay, I just wanted to show you guys how I routed this wire here. So I'm going to splice that bundle of 3 wires onto the 3 wires that I disconnected from the top of the fuel tank there, from the pressure sensor. And then I just ran them. Let me grab my light here. Drop my light. So there's some kind of fuel hose there that I zip tied it to keep it away from the drive shaft. Maneuver my light here, and then I zip tied it to some, hard to see, but zip tied it to some brake lines, went around this whatever ABS module or whatever, and then zip tied it to some more brake lines, and now we're up by the front of the truck. Zip tied it to more brake lines. I forgot to cut the tags off my zip ties there, and then it goes up into the engine compartment there. You can see the steering column and all that. So that's how I got it from the fuel tank up to the engine area. So we'll go back to the fuel tank there and splice up those wires now. Okay, just wanted to show you guys how I splice these wires together down at the fuel tank. So these are those 3 wires in the wiring harness that used to connect to that fuel pressure sensor, and I just connected the gray to the white, the brown to the black, and the green to the yellow. So again, the gray will be our +5 volt supply. The black will be our ground or our common or reference, and the green is going to be our signal. So on the other end, when we connect to the sensor, the white will be our same thing. White will go to the red, brown will go to the black, and yellow will go to the yellow. So now I'm just gonna zip tie this up out of the way so it stays away from the drive shaft here, and then we'll go up to the under the hood there and get that sensor wired up. Okay, I'll show you guys the engine bay side of it now. So now I'm looking down from the top, and you can see where I've got that wiring harness zip tied to those brake lines, and then it comes up, and then I just left an extra loop of a couple extra feet of wire, just because in the future I'll probably mount that sensor to the firewall, but for now I've just got it zip tied to this bundle of wire, and I've got a gauge in there too, so I can compare what my sensor is reading in HP tuners with what the gauge is saying. And like I said, I've just got that braided fuel line ran underneath the throttle body and connecting to that fitting on the fuel rail like I showed you earlier in the video. So just goes down underneath there and over to that T fitting where I've got the sensor and the gauge. So now I'm gonna cut these wires right about here and connect them to these wires going to the sensor. And then like I said, if you wanted to, you could put another hose off of there and run a fuel pressure gauge to somewhere where you could see it from the cab, but I think I'm just gonna go, if my sensor's reading 0, like the gauge is reading 0 right now, and when I go pressurize the fuel system and start the truck, if it's reading 55 or the same as the gauge, we'll call it good, and I'll trust that sensor. So I'm not even going to install that gauge where I can see it. So, and like I said, in the future I'll probably get rid of that T fitting and just mount the pressure sensor to the firewall right in there somewhere. So, but this will just be kind of a temporary setup to see if it works. All right, and there you can see I have got the wires connected there, and like I said before, yellow is going to yellow, brown is going to black, and white is going to red. So now I'll hook the laptop up again and turn on the key, and we should be reading that whatever. When I had that sensor on the bench, we should be reading with no pressure on it. I think it was 0.491 volts. I'll hook up the laptop and we should be reading that same amount because we've got 0 fuel pressure on the gauge. Actually, before I check that, I'm going to pull that fuel pump relay out again. Otherwise, as soon as I turn on the key, that's going to start pressurizing that system. So we'll do that test with this fuel pump relay out. Alright, so I got the laptop fired up and logging with 0 pressure on the gauge, and I'm seeing it's bouncing between 0.51 and 0.53 on the gauge here, so, or for voltage. So that's pretty close to, with my other power supply on the bench I had like 0.49 of a volt, so it's 0.02 or basically 2 or 3 hundredths of a volt different from what I was seeing on the bench. But so that's actually the value I'm going to be using in the formula. Instead of subtracting 0.491, I'll subtract 0.51. So switch to the laptop's view now, and we'll figure out how to enter that user math and get it set up so that we can log our fuel pressure down here in our VCM scanner. So we'll do that now. Okay guys, so got the laptop view fired up here. So first I'll show you how to add that channel. I had it added before, but I deleted it again so I can show you guys how to do this. So you just go into, you click on that gear with the plus sign to add a channel, go into the fuel system, tank, and fuel tank pressure right there. So you can double click on that and you can see it added it in right there. So now we got to go add a user math formula for converting that voltage to a PSI that makes sense to us. So you click on this tools tab up here, go into math parameters. It's under this user maths tab here, and I've already got 4 custom user math things plugged into there. So I'm gonna pick my first available one, which is this can't talk, user math number 5. So click on that. We're gonna go over here, we're gonna call this fuel pressure. So we're gonna add a new variable. Click on this link here. We're gonna add that same fuel tank pressure voltage. So double click on that, and it's in volts. We don't need any special functions, so we'll just click OK. So there is the parameter for fuel pressure. So I'm gonna go add in another bracket here. Whoops, not that kind of bracket, that kind of bracket. So we're going to take that and then we're going to subtract that 0.51 volts that we were seeing on our gauge when or in the scanner here when we had 0 pressure on there. So actually I think I need to add, let me just look at one of my other user math parameters here. Oh, that one doesn't have any brackets. That one does have brackets. So, oh yeah, I need the other kind of bracket. So I'm gonna go back here, put in a bracket like that, and a bracket over there. So basically I'm taking the voltage that sensor is putting out, subtracting 0.51 from it, and then I'm going to multiply it by that 43.215 that I figured out on that sheet earlier in the video. So I'll show another screen. I'll show that sheet on the screen here for a second or two. So now that we've got that user math parameter in there, not sure if we need to save it. Let me just have a look here. Maths. Yeah. So I've got my wideband O2 math parameter saved in there. So I'm going to save this fuel pressure math parameter in the same folder under HP Tuners, VCM Scanner, Maths. So that is saved. So now we should be able to close that out and go into, let's add it to one of our graphs here. So I'll right click on this area here, go to charts layout, and these other groups already have 4 parameters in, so I'm going to add it to this group 3. So we go add series, and we'll call it fuel pressure. Oh, I guess you can't have that many letters. We'll abbreviate it, and then click on this link, and we'll have to scroll down to our user defined maths, and click on our formula that we just added in. Our units will be PSI. Doesn't let me select those here for some reason. Let me go back. Just going to close out of this for a second, go back to that math parameter and see if there's a place I can set the units. Yep, right there. PSI. So now I'll save that again. Yes, I want to replace it. Should be able to close out of this now and go back to our charts layout, fuel pressure, and let me delete this and start over. So I'm going to add a series, fuel pressure, abbreviated, add our user defined math parameter, and there it lets me pick pounds per square inch right there. Decimal points, I don't know, let's go to 2 decimals. We shouldn't be any higher than, I don't know, I'm not planning on running much more than 15 pounds of boost, so 15 pounds over 58 or 60 would be 75, so if we go to 80, that should be fine. Color, we might as well go, whoops, reference line, we don't need color, I don't know, pick one. And now I'll save this, we'll save all groups, and these are, I'm calling this my VE tuning chart, so we'll save that. Yes, I want to replace it. Okay, now I will pause this for a second because I'm sitting over on the workbench, not connected to the truck. We'll take the laptop over to the truck and see if we can log our fuel pressure here. Okay, I just noticed a mistake that I need to fix here that I made in the last part of the video. I entered that 80 in the wrong spot, so minimum should be 0, maximum should be 80. I had 80 in the minimum spot here, so we'll save that again. All groups, Randy VE charts, and yeah, now it's looking right. So now we'll go over to the truck and try some logging. Alright, so I'm hooked up and you can see we've got 0.53 volts from our fuel tank pressure sensor, which is corresponding to 0.75 psi, which agrees with the gauge. So now I'm going to plug in this fuel pump relay and we'll see if that pressure starts to come up. So plug that in, and I might have to, let me go turn the key off and on here. And there you go, you can see our fuel pressure came up to 6 pounds there. See, we're logging 6.66 psi, and that basically agrees with what the gauge is saying. So I'm going to try fire the truck up and we'll see what happens to our fuel pressure there. And there you can see we're running at 51, 52 psi. Let's see what the gauge is saying. And that's pretty well gauge is saying less than 55 anyways, so we'll call that pretty good. And I just shut the truck off. You can see that it's dropping slowly. It was at 48.02, now it's at 47. There it's showing about 48, so I think we'll call that a win. We're logging fuel pressure from that new sensor I installed. Okay guys, I think we're going to wrap this one up. We've got that fuel pressure sensor working and logging in HP tuners. So next video we're going to take the truck out and test this sensor out on the road and see if we are actually, my suspicion is, like I've said in previous videos, I suspect that my stock fuel pump isn't keeping up, but now that we can log our fuel pressure with HP tuners, I'm going to go out and try and confirm that. And if that's the case, or even if that isn't the case, we're going to put in that new 525 Walbro Hellcat pump. So stay tuned, that'll be coming up in a future video. So thanks for watching, thanks for commenting, liking, and subscribing and all that, and we'll talk to you on the next one. Bye for now.